Hello everyone, it's Elizabeth from the Smart Stitcher. In this week's tutorial we have something a bit different for you. I've created a glove making template. Now this is the template I've been creating in the tutorial series that I've just been running, and this is available to download if anybody would like to have a go at creating a pair of gloves, but maybe they're making the patterns a little bit hard, so you want to maybe work from my template. Maybe you just want to have a go at putting the gloves together without making the pattern, then this may be for you. So I'll put the link in the description where you can download this for free. And I just wanted to talk you through how to assemble it. So it comes as a PDF download. So you will need to check your printer settings because there is a test square as a bit of a guide that should be 4 centimeters by 4 centimeters when you print it off. So please do just check that before you print off the whole pattern. When you download the pattern itself, there are 4 pieces of paper that you will be getting with your this particular download. So first one will be the palm view, and I've also got some sort of tips and some key bits of information just to help you with sort of making the glove as well, and also to sort of help with labeling everything so that everything does come together quite nicely. You'll notice that on the pattern itself there are some grey dots, and if I just zoom in I can show you those. Now these are just to help with matching up, particularly with matching points A, B, C and D. They are there just as a sort of a bit of a guide to help level everything up when you come to put it together. So the first sheet that you'll come across, and they may sort of be printed in a slightly different order, but you've got the palm view and we've labelled A, B, C and D, and we've also added on where the stretch is going to go. I've added a couple of points because on the back of the hand we've got a bit of a guide as to where the lines will meet up, and then at the base, I'm going to show you how to do this in just a moment, obviously another key area to line up and make sure that these 2 pieces come together nice and evenly, because nobody wants an uneven glove. The third page, you've got the thumb template, and again we've got some grey circles to match up with our letters. We've got our fourchette and we've got our test square to make sure that obviously we're printing at the correct size. I've also got on the final page, I've just got a kind of paper copy of how to put everything together, and I'm going to run through this with you now to make sure that you are happy with it coming together, you know what you're looking for, and that we've also labelled everything correctly. Down the bottom of this particular page, if you get stuck or if you think you haven't labelled something correctly, you've got the outline of the template so that you can look at your template and then make sure you know which way round it goes. So let's get into putting it together. The first thing I'm going to do is actually to cut off this straight edge here. So I'm going to go right the way across the paper to cut off this section of excess here so that I can then join it up to the palm view of the glove. So I'm just going to go ahead and slice that off. I'm going to be using a scalpel, but of course you can use scissors, scalpel, but obviously if you are using a scalpel, please make sure that you are doing it safely. So I've scalpelled off down this, this is where technically I suppose it's the index finger that I'm coming down, and I'm now going to, I can get rid of that excess piece of paper. I'm now going to overlap the back of the hand onto the palm view. Now this is where it can really help to use a ruler at the bottom here. So I'm going to be using my ruler just on both pieces of paper, because what I want to do is to get the base nice and straight as I'm matching everything up. So I can see that just down to the bottom right, a little bit down here, that my back of my hand is slightly lower than I want it to be. So I'm just going to wiggle that about to get it into position. I want to keep my ruler nice and straight, because what I don't want to do is to lose the straight line across the base and end up with an uneven glove. I'm actually just going to weight the ruler on the left hand side there, and then I've got both hands free just to get this into the right position. So I'm lining up so that it's horizontal at the base and that it's fairly true to vertical as we come up the middle here, which we are joining. So now I've got those lined up, I'm going to tape them down, and I'm going to use some sort of fairly longish strips. And again, I'm using a sort of a tape that you can see through, that can be helpful when you're working with patterns. And I'm going to just put some long strips all the way down to the ruler. Now I know that my bottom edge is straight, which is really good, and I can now see that I am pretty much level, and I will just check. Yeah, I'm pretty much level with my base, and I've also got my verticals nice and happy as well. So the next thing I'm going to do is grab my paper scissors, and I am going to just rough cut all the way around, leaving quite a small border, probably about 1 centimetre or so, around the pattern template. So you can see here what I've just done, and I'm literally just going to go all the way around the trank template, and then I'm going to do exactly the same on the fourchette and the thumb pieces, and then we're going to come back because we're going to be gluing them onto card. So we've now rough cut round everything, and it's all nice with a nice little border. Sometimes I've gone slightly less than 1 centimetre, that's absolutely fine. As long as you don't actually cut into your lines, you're fine. I'm now using, I quite like craft cards to use for my templates, so I'm going to now be gluing my pattern pieces onto the craft card. What I don't want is any bits that are sort of flapping about, so I'm going to make sure that I've covered all the way around my lines as well as some of the inside of the pieces. So particularly if I'm doing the fourchettes or the fingers, I don't want any bits to sort of start kind of flapping up, so I'm going to pay particular attention to those to make sure that they are stuck down nice and evenly. Something else to watch for, which can happen with glue, if you're using an aerosol glue, please make sure that you are in a well ventilated area following the manufacturer's instructions. If you're using something like a glue stick like this one here, sometimes these can get a little flaky. What you don't want is any big globs of glue sat behind your pattern pieces, so always make sure that when you're rolling this about and smearing it on, that it's completely smooth. There's no bits of glue that have kind of bubbled off and are going to cause problems for us. Something to be just a little cautious of when you're gluing your trank down is air bubbles that can form under the paper. This is where it can be quite useful to maybe have something like a ruler or a longer bone folder, so that as you are gluing and sort of spreading everything out, you can just slide that across your paper to make sure that you've got everything nice and flat. So sometimes you can, if the glue is particularly watery, you might find that it sort of weakens the paper and the paper sort of bubbles a little bit, so we don't want that. Sometimes once you've glued it down, you may need to let it dry, so to avoid anything else kind of bubbling up with it. So I'm just using the ruler as a bit of a guide to come across to make sure that I am completely flat. So always keep an eye out. You might get the occasional sort of mini wrinkle, they're fine, I wouldn't worry too much about them. But if you've got anything that's distorting the paper itself, that's usually a sign of a little bit more bigger trouble lurking elsewhere. So just take a moment just to lift the paper off the card and then to sort of flatten it back down again. So I'm fairly happy with that. There may be some air bubbles that appear as it dries just from where I've perhaps missed a bit of glue on the back, but for what I can see here now, this is completely flat. I'm happy with that. We're going to go ahead and cut it out. Now I quite like using a scalpel to help me here, and where the edges are straight, I'm going to be using a scalpel and a metal ruler to help. Now the eager beavers amongst you may have noticed that there is about 1 millimetre out on the base here. I'm not going to worry about that because that's I can just sort of rectify that with the ruler and cut a straight line. I'm going to be very careful when it comes to sorting out my fingertips, because what I don't want to do is I'm not going to cut down here right down to the base of the fingers, but I want to get nice and close into the sort of tapering shape of each fingertip. So I'm going to show you a little trick to help with that in just a moment. I've been using a scalpel and a ruler to cut out so far, and there's something I just wanted to show you. You can see here I've got a slightly fluffy edge to my card, and the camera can just about pick it up, but there is a very sort of fine white line where I haven't had my ruler right up against the line. So a key tip when you are cutting out is to make sure, certainly for the pattern piece that we've got here, that you are always on the outside of the line. The fluffy bits are going to indicate that yes, my card might be just a little damp from the glue, but also my blade in my scalpel probably needs changing. So I'm going to come back and I'm going to do a very fine cut to get rid of that white bit and to also get rid of these fluffy bits, because I certainly don't want them on my pattern pieces when I'm trying to draw around onto my leather. So I'm much happy with that now. That's a much better edge, and as you can see there's sort of the tiniest of wispy bits of card that came off, but it does make a difference if you can really cut very neatly, because that's then reflected as you draw onto your leather as well. So we don't want to kind of waste anything or have any awkward bits poking out. When you're cutting your curves, it's also a really good idea to have a little bit of a practice as to how you find your hand is most comfortable when cutting the curve. I find for certain types of curves it's easier for me to be cutting in and then out, and sometimes that's different. So on a scrap bit of card, just give yourself a moment, draw a few lines just with a pencil, and just have a practice to see how your hand feels when you're cutting, and then let that be your guide when it comes to cutting out the shape of the curves on the pattern pieces. Once we've cut everything out, you can just turn over and just by eye do a little check of your edges, everything where you've cut, and if you notice any burrs, sometimes this can happen when you're cutting a curve and where you sort of come out from one direction and then you might change your angle and change your position of cutting. Sometimes just where those two areas start and finish there is a little bit of a burr. Now I've got just a tiny sort of corner of card here on mine, and I'm just going to, with the scalpel, I can just very carefully slice that off to give that fingertip a nice finish. Now the next thing we're going to do on the pattern piece is to cut out this central section where the thumb is going to go, and again I can use a ruler and then I can also freehand cut around the curve. If you're just using scissors, what's useful to do with your scissors is to almost sort of poke a hole into this space that we are going to be cutting out, and sometimes you can sort of make a hole in the middle and then just do some cuts at regular intervals almost to the edge but not touching the edge, a bit like the spokes on a wheel, and then you can get your scissors in and you can then cut out that section a lot easier. If you're using a scalpel, obviously just make sure that you are consistent with the lines that you are following. Another tip when you're cutting stuff out is remember to breathe. It can be very easy to hold your breath whilst you're concentrating, particularly when you are doing fine areas, but a few deep breaths before you begin and make sure that you're breathing throughout. Now, making sure that I come out of my corners, I've pretty much got my thumb template, my thumb sort of hole out, and what I want to do, I've stopped cutting here, but I want to follow that principle of coming away from the corner so that I always get a nice kind of shape to my corners. So I've kept my curve as I've come round, but now I've sort of turned my template round so I can just pop my scalpel in and join up my two lines. And again, turn your template over, double check how smooth it looks, and if there's any bits that might just need anything shaving off. I think I'm actually pretty happy with how mine looks. Check the areas where it overlaps, make sure that they're nice and flat, and I think then we are now good to add our markings. Now we've got our thumb hole cut out. Just wanted to add a little bit of a word about the stretch lines. Those two won't be level, so don't worry about leveling them when you are joining the pattern. It's the base of the glove that's the important one to line up. The next thing we're going to do is to mark the base of the fingers across the palm view and also across the back of the hand. Now I'm going to take my awl. I've got a cork mat underneath. I want to keep my awl as vertical as possible, and I'm going to push down on the very end of the line that we have there. I'm going to do that on all of my lines, and hopefully you can just about see that, so that I'm marking the base of the fingers. Now when we are sewing the glove, we're not going to be cutting these until we actually cut them out on the leather, so we need to know where to join them to, which is why if you can make sure that you get a really good taper shape when you're cutting out the top of the finger here, then that particular point where you started will also be level with the point at the base of the fingers, which is really important because you want to be able to cut straight down. Now we've marked, which is now the right hand view of the hand, so we now need to turn over and just check the holes on the other side. So I don't need to sort of make the hole again, but I can just put my awl in just to make sure that that hole is nice and evenly opened up. Now when we're looking at this side, this is in fact now the left hand side of our glove, and we need to just make sure that we label that accordingly, because it can easily get confused when you are in the middle of working on your glove. So I'm going to just mark this with an L, just so that I know it's my left hand and I know that the right is on the other side. The other thing I now want to transfer are the position of these letters. If it helps, you can poke the little grey dots and you can also transfer those markings, but that's not necessary because they are sort of quite distinct kind of areas. But what I will need to do is just make sure that I put B in, because I've managed to cut that off and put that in the wrong place. So we'll put A, B, C and D on the other side. So we'll start here at A, B, C and D. So now we've transferred that information, we know that they are going to match up. The stretch will be the same again on both sides because it's still going to go across the hand. The last one to work on, of course, is the thumb piece. Now we just need to make sure that we know we've got the sort of hole at the start of the line here and the hole just before the dot for C. So I'm going to make sure that again I'm on my cork board. I'm going to poke my awl through at the base of the line and at the start of the line, and then I'm going to just turn that over, make sure that those holes are reinforced. This of course is the left hand view, so I want to make that really clear and not to forget that. A final thing just to mark on is just a little reminder, so that when you have your trank with the right hand view, you know that you are cutting one for the right, you'll turn it over and you are cutting one for the left. Same with the thumb piece, that we start, we're looking at our right hand view and then we will be turning it over and cutting one for the left hand view. The fourchettes don't have perhaps a left and a right in quite the same way, but what we have to make sure that we do is cut 6 with the sort of brown side of the card looking at us, and then we turn it over and we cut another 6 with the white side of the card looking at us, and that gives us our 12 that we need to go in between our fingers. So we've now cut out and prepared our pieces. We've got everything onto card, and again you might make your next pair and think, oh, I'm going to tweak this or I'm going to alter that, but you've always got a sort of really good start point to return to. So the next step is of course to make your gloves. So happy making.